Most people have no idea, but for years, Africa has been a hidden playground for Western powers pulling strings behind the scenes. With military bases sprinkled across the continent, Western countries have quietly used their advanced tech and intelligence to spy, gather secrets, and make moves that benefit their own interests, not Africa's. This is exactly why leaders like President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso and the heads of the Alliance of Sahel states decided it was time to shut down these foreign military bases. But here's where it gets wild. President Traore didn't just sit behind a desk making decisions. In a surprising twist, he personally caught a foreign spy right on Burkina soil. Yes, you heard that right. President Traore is known for something rare among world leaders. He sometimes leads his troops directly on the ground during military operations. And it's not just Burkina Faso pushing back. In a packed room filled with global leaders, including French representatives, Mali's foreign minister, Abdoulaye Diop, dropped a bombshell. He revealed that he had written to the United Nations Security Council, accusing France of secretly backing terrorist groups. His letter wasn't vague. It listed over 50 times when French military aircraft illegally flew into Malian airspace. But it gets worse. According to Diop, those planes weren't just sightseeing, they were allegedly delivering weapons and ammunition to armed groups operating in the Sahel region. Now, why didn't France just go through the proper channels? Simple. If they had asked Mali for clearance, Malian officials would have inspected the planes, and the hidden cargo would have been exposed. Instead, they slipped into the airspace without permission, using it as a backdoor to armed groups that have fueled chaos in the region. Even more shocking, Mali claims it had solid evidence of these violations and shared it with the United Nations. But the response: silence, no action, no investigation, nothing. If you are still watching this video, it means you love it. Why not take out a second and hit that like button? Have you done that? Let us move on. Mali's Prime Minister Choguel Maïga didn't hold back when he backed up claims of foreign interference, saying he's got solid proof to support it. According to Maïga, French troops once set up camp in Kidal, a town in northern Mali. But here's the twist. They didn't just use it as a base. Instead, they allegedly handed control of the town over to a group with known ties to terrorists. Even worse, the Malian military was reportedly blocked from entering Kidal while it was under French control, leaving a key part of their own country off limits. But things took a turn when Mali kicked the French troops out. With some backup from Russian forces, the Malian army was finally able to reclaim Kidal. For Mali, this wasn't just about taking back land. It was about breaking free from what they saw as France's grip on the region. And for many, France's alleged strategy of quietly supporting rebel groups to maintain influence has been nothing short of disgraceful. But Mali isn't fighting this battle alone. Neighbouring countries like Niger and Burkina Faso have caught on too. Their military-led governments have stepped up, realising they needed to shut the door on foreign meddling before it was too late. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore has been in the thick of it, leading efforts to tackle the terrorism that some believe France helped fuel. Now, if you've been following the news, you've probably heard reports claiming that security has worsened since French troops left. But here's the thing. While the media paints a picture of growing chaos, the Burkina military has actually scored major wins, reclaiming territories once overrun by terrorist groups. So why isn't this front page news? Well, critics say it's because the media is too cosy with the French government, focusing only on negative headlines to make Traore's administration look weak. By highlighting rising casualties and instability, they create this idea that the French troops were the only thing keeping the peace. It's a clever narrative that casts doubt on the Burkina military's ability to handle the crisis on their own. But here's something they don't like to talk about. Research shows that Burkina Faso was actually safer before French forces ever set foot in the country. And let's be honest, if France had a hand in stirring up the chaos in the first place, why would anyone expect them to fix it? The plot thickens though, because France isn't the only foreign player accused of fanning the flames in Africa. Recent reports suggest the United States has been even more involved, sometimes in ways that make France's actions look like the tip of the iceberg. Back in 2007, the United States decided it needed a bigger footprint in Africa and launched something called AFRICOM, short for United States Africa Command. Now, this wasn't America's first military gig on the continent. They already had around 1,700 troops stationed at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. But clearly that wasn't enough. It was President George W. Bush who really pushed for this expansion. He framed it as a mission to help Africa, saying something like, "Africa is a land of both promise and struggle, with disease, war and poverty threatening human dignity and global security." Sounds noble, right? But let's be real, there's a heavy dose of condescension in that statement. It's like saying, "We're here to save you, and also protect ourselves." The official story was that AFRICOM would help Africa stabilise fragile governments, strengthen democracies, and fight terrorism. But here's the catch. It was really about promoting US interest on African soil. African countries weren't buying it. In fact, most of them, and even the African Union, flat out rejected the idea. They saw right through the shiny promises and were suspicious of America's true intentions. After all, having a foreign military command operating in your backyard feels like someone barging into your house and claiming they're there to help while rearranging all your furniture. But did Washington care about that pushback? Not really. Despite the overwhelming rejection from African leaders, AFRICOM went ahead anyway, and it's been growing stronger ever since. Now, the US likes to claim that AFRICOM is all about partnership with African nations. But here's where things get tricky. This so-called partnership, it's not the friendly, equal footing kind you'd imagine. Instead, it often feels more like this. The US approaches an African country and says, "Hey, let's set up a military base here." The country declines. So America comes back, but this time with a little pressure, like cutting off access to much-needed loans from big players like the IMF or World Bank. It's the kind of backroom bargaining no one talks about publicly, but it happens. See, the US has major sway over the International Monetary Fund, IMF. It's the biggest financial backer, and it uses that leverage when African nations hesitate to play ball. Scholar Zora Ahmed puts it perfectly. The relationships the US builds for its military operations sit in this awkward grey zone between friendly consent and outright coercion. Many African countries rely heavily on foreign loans to keep their economies afloat. So when push comes to shove, leaders often feel cornered, forced to say yes just to keep the lights on. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? The same country that constantly talks about human rights, justice, and respecting other nations' sovereignty is often the one stepping all over those very principles, just because it can. But honestly, that's just scratching the surface of what AFRICOM is really up to in Africa. Now, AFRICOM loves to say it's in Africa as a partner, working alongside African countries, not to fight wars, but to stop them before they even start. Sounds good on paper, right? But here's where things get sketchy. Most of what AFRICOM does is wrapped in secrecy. In fact, a lot of African governments have no idea what US troops are really doing on their soil, and yet it's called a partnership. Even basic details, like where US elite forces are deployed or what missions they're carrying out, are often kept under wraps. It's like playing on a team but not being told the game plan. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. Remember those rumours about secret US biolabs scattered across Africa? If you've seen our video on that, you know there are claims that the US military has been setting up these labs under the radar, sometimes even using locals for experiments. Crazy, right? But it begs the question, if AFRICOM is really in Africa for peace and security, why keep so many secrets from their so-called partners? It isn't just about stopping terrorism before it starts, like President Bush once claimed. If that were really the goal, then why is terrorism still spreading across Africa, especially in places like Mali and the Sahel region? Think about it. AFRICOM has been operating in Africa since 2007. They've got some of the world's most advanced military tech, drones, surveillance gear, you name it. So how did they miss the rise of jihadist groups in Mali? And even if they didn't see it coming, which seems unlikely, why couldn't they stop it early on? The answer seems pretty obvious. The whole fighting terrorism thing might just be a cover story. AFRICOM isn't really about helping Africa. It's about pushing American interests, plain and simple. And based on some reports, there's even talk that US involvement might be fueling some of the chaos on the continent, rather than stopping it. This is exactly why more African leaders need to take a page from President Traore's playbook, cutting ties with foreign military influence and shutting down anything that threatens the continent's sovereignty. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button